You scratch my car, I'll sue you into the dirt. Those words still ring in my head, sharp, shrill, and perfectly fitting for the woman who thought the entire subdivision bowed to her. The white Bentley shimmered under the morning sun, blocking my barn like a gleaming fortress. I remember gripping the handle of my coffee mug so tight I thought it might crack. That was the moment the quiet of my life ended. For a second, the air stood still. Even the sparrows stopped chirping. My old barn door, hand-built, weathered but strong, loomed behind her luxury blockade. I had plans that morning. I was hauling lumber, fixing the eastern beam before the first rain. But now, my barn, my space, was trapped behind her ego on four wheels. Ever feel that mix of disbelief and rage that makes your pulse go silent? That was me, watching her swing her designer purse like a badge of authority. Karen wasn't just any neighbor. She was the self-appointed queen of the Willow Creek Homeowners Association. Blonde bob, pressed floral blouse, diamond studs that caught every ounce of sunlight, she carried herself like she owned every fence, mailbox, and blade of grass on our street. Behind her stood two uniformed cops, their cruiser idling at the curb. She had called them, on me, for threatening behavior, she said. What threat? I hadn't even stepped off my porch. It started 3 weeks before that morning. Back then, I was the quiet type, kept to myself, paid dues, followed rules. The HOA board never bothered me, and I never bothered them. But then I decided to repaint my barn door, a deep rustic red, the same shade my father used when he built it 40 years ago. The paint wasn't pre-approved, she said. The bylaws required neutral earth tones. When I reminded her, barns by definition were never beige, she smiled that cold, tight-lipped smile that said, "We'll see about that." 2 days later, I got the first notice, unauthorized modification to exterior structure. Then a second one, failure to comply with HOA color standards. The fine started small, $50 here, $100 there, but the principle of it burned more than the money. That barn wasn't just wood and paint. It was legacy. It was my father's craftsmanship, every nail driven by hand. But Karen didn't care. She wanted conformity, control, and a neighborhood that looked like her Pinterest board. That morning, when I saw the Bentley, I already knew she was escalating. The HOA meeting 2 nights before that morning had been tense. Karen had proposed a motion, restricted usage of utility buildings, which everyone knew was code for ban the barn guy's repairs. I stood up, calmly explained my rights under the county's agricultural ordinance. The room went quiet. She didn't like that. Karen thrived on unanimous nods, not challenges. I walked out before the vote, but her eyes followed me like storm clouds. Now she stood there smirking beside her car, one manicured finger pointed toward my barn. "This," she said to the officers, "is the ongoing issue. He continues to defy the HOA's directives. His structure violates code, and I have photographic proof." One of the officers glanced at me, his expression somewhere between weary and amused. "Ma'am, this looks like a private matter." Karen's tone sharpened. "Private! He's depreciating property values. My car is here as a temporary demonstration. If he touches it, I'll file destruction of property charges." You ever watch someone weaponize rules that were never meant to be weapons? That's what she did. She didn't park there by accident. It was bait, a test to see how far I'd go, how much of my patience she could scrape away before I snapped. I set my coffee down on the porch railing and walked toward her. Each step felt heavier, like the air itself thickened around her smug grin. "Move your car, Karen," I said, voice even. She folded her arms. "Not until you take that door down. You're in violation. And until the board approves, this structure is sealed." I laughed, a short, bitter sound. "You think this is your land? It's our neighborhood, and I'll make sure it stays beautiful." Behind her, the Bentley's polished hood reflected the barn, defiant red against a sea of beige houses. The cops shifted uneasily. One finally said, "Ma'am, Maybe just move the car so there's no confrontation? Her eyes narrowed. No, he needs to learn to respect authority. There it was, the real issue. Authority, control. She didn't care about paint colors or bylaws. She wanted obedience. I turned away, didn't yell, didn't argue. I just stared at that old barn, my father's initials still carved faintly into one of the beams. Fine, I said, but don't say I didn't warn you. That night, I didn't sleep. The sound of rain tapping against the tin roof blended with the echo of her voice in my head. I opened the HOA handbook she'd mailed me, the one with all the highlights and notes she'd scribbled in the margins. I found something interesting on page 14, section 3.7. No homeowner may obstruct another resident's access to a functional structure. Her Bentley had done exactly that. I smiled. Sometimes justice hides in the fine print. By morning, she was back, in a raincoat this time, holding her phone like a weapon. You're being recorded. Touch my vehicle and you'll regret it. I nodded, calm as a still pond. Then keep recording. I walked past her, climbed into my tractor, the same one I used for hauling lumber. The engine rumbled to life, its growl echoing across the misty air. Karen shouted something, but I couldn't hear over the engine's roar. I moved it forward an inch, just an inch. The front loader hovered over the Bentley's hood, close enough for her to imagine what might come next. She screamed. The cops arrived again, sirens wailing this time. Did I crush her car that day? Not yet. But the look on her face, that flash of fear under all that arrogance, told me she finally realized I wasn't playing her game anymore. Later, the HOA sent a formal complaint. Aggressive behavior toward board member. They threatened legal action, fines, suspension of rights. But something changed after that morning. Other neighbors, the quiet ones who had endured her pettiness, started stopping by. A wave, a nod, a whispered, "Good for you." Turns out I wasn't the only one she'd been targeting. Every petty warning, every fine, every note left on a windshield, it all traced back to her. Karen didn't just enforce rules, she invented them. And her Bentley stunt, that was just her way of reminding everyone who ran Willow Creek. But power like hers doesn't last forever, not when it's built on intimidation. The cracks were starting to show. The next day, a letter appeared in my mailbox, unsigned but typed on HOA stationery. She's overstepping. Check the permit records. Something doesn't add up. No signature, no return address, but it was a clue, a whisper that maybe, just maybe, Karen wasn't as untouchable as she thought. I stared at that letter for a long time, the edges damp from my hands. The rain had stopped, but something heavier was rolling in. Not thunder, not weather, consequence. You ever get that feeling before a storm? The electric stillness, the quiet that's too quiet? That's what it felt like when I looked out and saw her Bentley still parked there, gleaming like a dare. I knew then, this wasn't about paint or bylaws anymore. This was war. Quiet, suburban, and perfectly legal on the surface. But underneath, it was about pride. And pride, in neighborhoods like ours, has a way of getting crushed. I didn't know it yet, but that white Bentley would become the first casualty. And when it happened, it wouldn't just make a dent in metal. It shattered the illusion of control she'd built around all of us. Because sometimes, to reclaim peace, you gotta make a little noise first. You can't park that here. It's a violation of Section 4.2, subsection C. Those were the first words out of her mouth that morning, sharp as gravel under a tire. The sound carried across the cul-de-sac, slicing through the still air like a judge's gavel. Karen stood there in her fitted navy blue power suit, clipboard tucked under one arm like it was the Constitution itself. Behind her, two cops lingered again, bored but alert, their cruiser parked at the curb with the engine idling. I leaned on the side of my tractor, squinting against the rising sun. "Morning to you, too," I said. The engine was off, the tires muddy from last night's rain. I'd parked it by the barn, same place I had for years. But now, according to her, it disrupted the visual harmony of the community. Visual harmony. That's what she called it. You believe that? She walked closer, heels clicking on the driveway like gunfire. "You think this is a farm?" she said. "This is Willow Creek Estates. We have standards." There it was again. Standards. Karen used that word like it gave her divine power. Behind those oversized sunglasses, I could almost see the thrill in her eyes. She loved this, the theater of control. For a second, I said nothing, just listened. You could hear the flags on the porches flapping, the faint hum of lawn sprinklers turning. Every sound in that perfect, polished cul-de-sac existed under her gaze. She didn't just run the HOA, she was the HOA. "You've been warned before. You can't leave heavy machinery on display. It's unsightly. And your barn," she paused, flipping through her clipboard, "still hasn't been inspected. That's another violation." I smiled, slow and deliberate. "You want to inspect my barn, Karen? You'll need a warrant or the county's permission." Her lips twitched. "You're being uncooperative." "I'm being lawful." The officers exchanged a look, one of those looks that says, "We're not getting paid enough for this." That was Karen's kingdom, a neighborhood of fear and paperwork. People didn't talk about her openly, but everyone knew her reach. You missed your lawn trimming schedule by a week? Citation. Garbage bin left out past noon? Warning letter. She once fined a family for having a pink tricycle visible from the street. It was madness disguised as order. 3 weeks earlier, I hadn't thought much of it. I'd heard the whispers, Karen's latest power move, the secret meetings in her living room, the constant rotation of board members who either quit or moved away. But once my barn paint incident made her notice me, I saw the real machine behind her smile. The HOA bylaws weren't just rules, they were weapons, vague enough to interpret, strict enough to punish. Take Rule 6.3. All outdoor structures must align with the community's color palette and aesthetic guidelines. The palette was defined by her, Karen and her aesthetic subcommittee, a group of 3 women who looked like they'd walked out of the same catalog, pastel sweaters, identical hairstyles, fake sympathy. She used those meetings like courtroom hearings. Neighbors stood before her with petitions, receipts, and photos, begging for mercy over mailbox heights or fence colors. The room smelled like lemon cleaner and anxiety. And at the end of every session, she'd flash that politician smile and say, "We just want what's best for everyone." Everyone, except the ones who challenged her. That morning as she stood before my tractor, the smell of wet grass and diesel filled the air. Her voice dripped with authority. "If this isn't moved by tomorrow," she said, "you'll receive a citation and a daily fine." "Under what section?" "Community aesthetics," she said confidently. "Which subsection?" She hesitated, just long enough for the silence to turn awkward. "Don't play lawyer with me." I chuckled. "I'm not, but maybe you should read your own rules. Section 4.2c applies to non-operational vehicles. This tractor, it's registered, insured, and operational." She flushed red. She didn't like being corrected, especially not in front of the officers. One of them coughed into his hand, trying not to smile. Karen turned toward him sharply. "You're witnessing this, right? He's being combative." He sighed. "Ma'am, this isn't a police matter. It's a civil issue between you two." "I'm the HOA president," she snapped. He shrugged. "Still civil." The silence that followed was thick. You could feel the neighborhood watching. Blinds cracked, curtains twitching. Every sound in that perfect polished cul-de-sac existed under her gaze. She didn't just run the HOA, she was the HOA. Finally, she adjusted her sunglasses, muttered something about documenting the violation, and stormed off toward her car. The cops followed her, one shaking his head. I watched her Bentley disappear down the street, that white luxury beast crawling past the perfect lawns she guarded like a dragon. But I knew better than to think it was over. Karen never let things go. She escalated. Always. Later that afternoon, I found a new letter taped to my mailbox. Mandatory Property Review, it read in bold. The inspection date? Tomorrow morning. The signature? Karen's, of course. It wasn't a coincidence. It was retaliation. That night, I called a friend of mine, Dave, a contractor who'd worked in our county for 20 years. Ever heard of an HOA demanding a property inspection on private land? I asked. He laughed. Only if there's an active construction permit or code complaint. Otherwise, that's a bluff. I smiled. That's what I thought. The next morning, her Bentley rolled up again at 8:03 sharp. Karen stepped out, clipboard ready, sunglasses gleaming. This time she brought 2 more board members, identical twins in cardigans, and, predictably, the same 2 cops. She was building her audience. She approached the barn like she was inspecting a crime scene. We received multiple complaints about noise, debris, and unauthorized equipment storage, she declared. Complaints from who? The community. Names? Confidential. Of course. Her favorite shield, confidential sources. Half the time those sources didn't exist. The other half, they were just her. I let her talk, watched her jot notes on that clipboard like she was writing a ticket to destiny. She circled my barn, pointed at imaginary violations, and whispered to her board members like they were detectives on a stakeout. Finally, she turned to me. "You'll need to submit a compliance plan within 7 days," she said. Tone smug. "Or what?" "Or the board will take further action." "What kind of action?" She smiled, small, cruel, and calculated. "You'll find out soon enough." You will not believe what she tried next. 2 days later, I got an email from the HOA's legal department, not Karen herself, but her new puppet lawyer. They were claiming my barn was an unregistered commercial facility because I operated heavy machinery. Their evidence? A photo of me on the tractor. I couldn't help but laugh. That tractor wasn't for business. It was for maintenance, mowing, hauling, repairs. But in Karen's world, logic was optional. Her goal was not to win legally. It was to exhaust me, drown me in paperwork, hearings, and threats until I broke. But here's the thing about people like Karen. They always overreach. And when they do, the paper trail betrays them. I started collecting my own evidence. Every email, every letter, every misquoted bylaw. I built a folder thick enough to make her clipboard look like a pamphlet. And when I dug into the HOA's filings with the county, I found something interesting. The community's aesthetic standards had never been updated in 6 years. Legally, they were unenforceable until renewed by a board vote. And guess what? Karen had skipped that vote twice. I sat there at my desk, the glow of my laptop screen flickering against the window, and smiled. Her empire had cracks, hairline fractures spreading faster than she realized. By the next HOA meeting, whispers had already started. Did you hear about the unrenewed bylaws? Can she even fine us legally? People were nervous, yes, but more than that, they were curious. They were waking up. When Karen called the meeting to order, her voice trembled just slightly. She noticed the shift, too. For the first time, she didn't own the room. I sat quietly in the back, arms crossed, letting her sweat through her presentation about community harmony. She talked for 20 minutes straight, trying to regain her grip, but the air was different now, thinner, uncertain. As the meeting adjourned, I caught her eye. For the briefest moment, I saw it, a flicker of doubt. She knew I knew something. And that's the thing about control. Once people realize it's not real, it starts to crumble. The queen of the cul-de-sac was still standing, but her crown, it was starting to tilt.
"This is your final warning, Mr. Miller." That was the line that started it all. It wasn't just words. It was a declaration of war, printed in bold across the top of a paper that flapped against my barn door in the wind. I remember the sound it made. Dry, hollow, like the calm before a thunderstorm. By then, I'd already learned to expect her little acts of intimidation. But this one felt official. The kind of letter you can't just crumple up and toss into the trash without consequence. I peeled it off the door, the tape snapping like a gunshot. And in that moment, I realized she wasn't going to stop. You ever get that feeling, that tight coil in your chest when someone crosses the line just one too many times? When it's not about the lawn anymore, or the fence height, or the color of your shutters. It's about control? That's where I was standing, right there in the middle of my driveway, holding that paper like a declaration of intent. Hers and mine. The notice cited unsanctioned modifications to exterior property structures. In plain English, she didn't like the barn. Never mind that the barn was built before the HOA even existed. Never mind that my property technically sat outside the association's jurisdiction line. Karen had decided I was under her rule, and when Karen decides, the HOA follows. That morning I walked back inside, set the letter on the kitchen counter, and poured myself a cup of coffee that went cold before I even took a sip. My dog, Max, sat by the window watching her white SUV crawl past the house for the second time that day. Same routine, same route. You see, Karen didn't just enforce the rules, she authored them. Every bylaw, every obscure code that most neighbors never bothered to read, she knew by heart, and she used them like tools, or maybe weapons. 3 days after that first notice, I got the fine, $250. Failure to comply with HOA Directive 8.1, unauthorized external storage building. I stared at it, then at the line demanding payment within 10 business days to avoid additional penalties. But here's the thing, I wasn't even a dues-paying member. My address wasn't listed in the HOA's incorporation documents. I double-checked, then triple-checked. I even drove to the county clerk's office downtown and requested the original boundary plat. The clerk, an older guy with coffee stains on his shirt, looked at the map, chuckled, and said, "Son, you're about 150 feet outside their zone. They can't touch you." That's when I knew I had them, or at least I thought I did. The next morning, I left a copy of that county map in Karen's mailbox, attached to a short note. "Outside HOA jurisdiction. Please cease communication." I figured that would be the end of it. It wasn't. A week later, she escalated. Saturday morning, I was repairing the fence post by the driveway when I saw her again, storming up the path, phone out, 2 officers trailing behind her. You could hear her voice before you saw her face, sharp, commanding. "There he is," she shouted. "That's the structure I reported." The younger officer, a guy who looked barely out of training, shifted uncomfortably. "Ma'am, we're just here to verify." Karen cut him off. "It's a violation of Section 8.1. The board voted unanimously." I set down my hammer, wiped my hands, and walked toward them. "Morning, officers. Can I help you?" Karen's eyes narrowed like I'd just challenged her authority on national television. "We've given you multiple written warnings. This structure," she pointed toward the barn, "is in direct violation of community standards." I smiled. "Karen, you might want to check your maps again. This property isn't part of your community." She laughed, that forced, condescending kind of laugh that only people in power seem to perfect. "That's not what our records show." The older officer, clearly uncomfortable, looked between us. "Sir, we're not here to issue citations, we're just mediating a complaint." "Complaint from whom?" I asked, though I already knew. Karen folded her arms. "The Homeowners Association." I took a step closer, holding out my phone. "Then maybe you should take a look at this." I pulled up a photo of the county boundary plat, the one stamped and signed by the clerk. According to county zoning, this property line sits beyond your HOA limits, which means your association has no authority here. For the first time, her confidence cracked, just slightly.
The muscle in her jaw twitched. The officers exchanged looks. The younger one spoke first. "Ma'am, if that's true, we don't have jurisdiction to enforce HOA bylaws here." Karen's voice tightened. "Then we'll escalate this to the board." "Please do. And while you're at it, make sure you record it. Transparency's important." She turned on her heel, muttering something about non-compliance and legal recourse, the phone still rolling video. I watched her retreat, that white SUV glinting in the sun as it sped away. That should have been the end. But deep down, I knew better. Karen wasn't just mad, she was humiliated. And people like her don't forget humiliation. They turn it into fuel. 3 nights later, I started noticing small things. Mail going missing. My trash cans mysteriously moved from the curb to the end of the street. One morning, my driveway was covered in bright pink flyers reading, "Community Violator, Unapproved Structure." I laughed at first, but laughter turned to something else when I realized the flyers weren't just on my property. They were on my neighbors, too. You know what's funny about HOA politics? They thrive on whispers, on perception. It's never about truth. It's about who controls the narrative. And at that moment, Karen controlled it. So I started documenting everything. Every flyer, every anonymous complaint email that somehow arrived minutes after her morning jog, every car that slowed in front of my driveway. I kept it all, time-stamped, printed, and neatly filed. Because in an HOA war, evidence is the only ammunition that matters. I filed a report with the county sheriff's office for harassment. They didn't do much, just told me to keep the peace and avoid confrontation. But it wasn't about immediate action. It was about building a record. That's when I started noticing something else, a pattern. Every letter, every complaint, all dated the day after HOA board meetings, which meant she wasn't acting alone. There was a system behind her, a machine. So I started going to those meetings, not as a member, as an observer. The first time I walked into that community center, every head turned. Karen froze mid-sentence when she saw me take a seat in the back row, notebook in hand. She smiled that same brittle smile. "We welcome all residents, even those on the outskirts." Outskirts. That word stuck with me. The meeting dragged on. Landscaping budgets, pool repairs, some nonsense about fence paint colors. Then came the unresolved violations section. She brought up my name. Again. I raised my hand. "Point of order," I said calmly. "You're discussing enforcement actions against a non-member. That's illegal under county HOA statute." The room went silent. She blinked, the color rising in her face. "You're disrupting the meeting." "No, I'm clarifying jurisdiction." That's when one of the other board members, a quiet man with wire-rimmed glasses, spoke up. "Karen, you're right. His property isn't listed." You could have heard a pin drop. Karen's smile didn't waver, but her knuckles whitened around the gavel. "We'll revisit this item later," she said through clenched teeth. That was the night the balance shifted, just slightly, but enough to make her nervous. When I got home, there was another envelope taped to my door. No fine this time, just a single line, handwritten in red ink. "You're making this harder than it needs to be." That's when I realized a chilling thing. This wasn't about rules anymore. It was personal. And if she wanted to turn it into warfare, I was ready. Because what she didn't know, what no one in that neighborhood knew, was that I'd already filed for a public records request on every HOA action she had taken in the past 6 months. Every violation, every letter, every fine. And what I found buried in those papers, that was the beginning of her unraveling. But I'll get to that. For now, just remember this. In every HOA war, There's always a turning point, and mine came taped to a barn door, folded neatly in a plastic sleeve. You think that's petty? Just wait until you hear what she did next.
Move your car, Karen. That's all I said. 5 simple words. But the way she looked at me, you'd think I'd just insulted royalty. Her Bentley sat like a silver brick in the middle of my driveway, its headlights still glowing faintly, the smell of expensive exhaust mixing with the cool evening air. I could hear cicadas buzzing somewhere behind the barn, but even they seemed to hush as she crossed her arms and said, "It's only for a moment." Only for a moment. That's how it always started. One temporary rule, one brief inconvenience, one small exception that somehow always worked in her favor. You ever meet someone who treats boundaries like suggestions? That was Karen. She didn't cross lines, she erased them. And standing there, watching her car gleam in the sunset like it owned the place, I realized just how far she was willing to go to prove that point. The Bentley wasn't random. It was a message. It was Friday evening, 3 weeks after our last confrontation. The board had gone quiet, too quiet, after I exposed the jurisdiction issue at their meeting. No fines, no letters, no visits. I almost thought she'd given up. Then I came home from work and found that luxury car parked dead center on my gravel path, blocking the barn doors where I stored my tools and generator. I stood there for a good 10 seconds, just staring. My first instinct was disbelief. My second was fury. Karen leaned against the car like she was posing for a photo shoot. She said, "We're having a community event tomorrow," gesturing vaguely toward the cul-de-sac. I just needed to unload some equipment. "On my property?" I asked. She smiled. "It's not clear where your property line begins, is it?" Oh, she knew exactly where it began. She'd seen the county map I had. This wasn't confusion. It was provocation. The kind that makes you question if you're overreacting or if you're finally seeing someone's true face. I took a slow breath, trying to steady the heat in my chest. "Move your car." Her lips curved into a smirk. "It's only for a moment. Don't make a scene." And that's when I realized she wanted a scene. She wanted me to lose my temper, to give her something she could record. Her phone was already in her hand, camera quietly rolling, the red recording light barely visible through the reflection. So instead, I pulled out my own phone and started filming too. "Just documenting the trespassing," I said, calm as stone, "in case the sheriff asks." Her eyes flickered, a small involuntary twitch of annoyance. "Trespassing, don't be ridiculous." "Then you won't mind me calling to clarify." I tapped the screen like I was dialing. That did it. She sighed dramatically, rolling her eyes like a teenager told to clean their room. "Fine, I'll move it. Some of us are just trying to make this community better, you know." The Bentley engine roared to life, soft and smug. She reversed, but not before spinning the tires just enough to send a shower of gravel across my boots. Petty, deliberate. The moment she was gone, I took photos. Tire tracks, timestamp, everything. My hands were shaking, not from fear, from anger. You'd think it was just about a car, but it wasn't. It was about principle, control. The unspoken rule in neighborhoods like ours, whoever documents better wins. That night, I couldn't sleep. I sat at my desk with a mug of coffee gone cold, rereading the HOA charter I'd pulled from the public records request. Every clause, every subpoint, I combed through them like a detective looking for fingerprints. And then there it was. Section 11.3. Board members shall not use HOA authority to interfere with, access, or obstruct private property not under HOA jurisdiction. The words practically glowed on the screen. Violation, clear as day. The next morning, I filed a formal complaint, not to the HOA, but to the state's Department of Community Affairs. They oversaw homeowners associations and handled abuse of authority claims. I attached photos, timestamps, and a transcript of the video. I even added the map proving jurisdiction limits. It wasn't revenge, not yet. It was accountability. 3 days later, I got an acknowledgement email. Your case has been assigned for preliminary review. That's when the waiting began. But Karen didn't wait. She retaliated. The following week, I noticed fresh paint lines on the edge of my driveway, bright orange, snaking in from the street and stopping halfway into my gravel. Utility markings, except there were no utilities scheduled for that area. A quiet attempt to blur the property line. Then came the letters again. Anonymous, but everyone knew the tone. Certain residents are neglecting shared aesthetic standards. She was pushing the neighbors, turning them against me, and it worked, at least for a few of them. One morning, my next-door neighbor, Paula, stopped me as I was loading lumber into the truck. "Look," she said, glancing around nervously, "Karen says your barn is causing issues with resale values. She's going to bring it up again at the board meeting." "Even after everything?" I asked. Paula shrugged. "She says she's got new evidence, photos or something." I smiled. "Let her." Because by then, I'd already started preparing something of my own, a quiet insurance policy. You see, under state HOA statutes, any board action, including correspondence, votes, and enforcement efforts, must be logged and available for member review. Karen had been sloppy. She'd been sending violation notices and internal memos from her personal email. That alone violated transparency laws. I had copies, screenshots, metadata. So when the next board meeting rolled around, I showed up again. Same folding chairs, same stale coffee, same eyes turning when I entered the room. Karen sat at the front, pearls gleaming, a binder stacked with papers beside her. She looked confident, until she noticed the man sitting next to me. He wasn't from the neighborhood. He was from the Department of Community Affairs. Karen's voice wavered slightly when she called the meeting to order. "Let's begin with open concerns," she said, her usual confidence cracking just a hair. I raised my hand. "Yes, I have one." The room fell silent. I stood, calm and steady, holding up a folder of my own. "On June 14th, you used HOA authority to block access to my private property. On June 15th, you distributed misleading communications to the community about my compliance status. Both actions violate Section 11.3 of your own charter." Her mouth opened, then shut again. She wasn't expecting me to use her own bylaws against her. "I've filed a report," I continued. "The state investigator sitting behind me is here to verify documentation." The whispering started immediately. Low, sharp, scandalous. Karen laughed, but it was brittle. "You think you can intimidate me with bureaucratic nonsense?" I met her eyes. "No, Karen. I'm just following the rules, something you should be familiar with." She slammed the gavel. Meeting adjourned. But that moment, that single flickering moment where she realized the ground beneath her feet was starting to crack, it was worth every sleepless night. Afterwards, the investigator pulled me aside. "You've got a solid case, but these things take time. Be patient." Patience. I'd been patient for months, but now it wasn't just about defending my property. It was about exposing the rot underneath that HOA. By the following week, rumors spread that Karen had been asked to provide records of all her board actions. Her allies were nervous. 2 of them stopped attending meetings altogether. And yet somehow, she still had the audacity to wave at me when we passed on the street, that same polished smile, as if none of it mattered. That's when I knew the war wasn't over. She wasn't scared yet. And people like Karen don't stop until they're forced to. So I started digging deeper.
into board minutes, into archived emails, into a suspicious beautification fund she'd created the year before. Because if she wanted to play power games, I was going to play smarter. And somewhere buried in those records, I found something that didn't add up. A check signed in her name, authorized from HOA funds, but cashed at a private contractor, unrelated to any community project. The kind of thing that could end more than just her presidency. But that's for the next chapter. For now, all you need to know is this. When she parked that Bentley across my path, she didn't just block my barn doors. She crossed a line she couldn't uncross. You think that was bold? Wait until you see what she tried to hide next. The crunch echoed through the neighborhood like thunder rolling off a cliff. For a moment, time stopped. Then came the scream, high, raw, and furious. Karen stood there, her robe flapping in the night wind, mouth open, eyes wide, watching her silver Bentley cave in like a tin can beneath the tractor's front loader. I didn't say a word. Didn't need to. The sound did all the talking. You could almost feel the shock ripple down the cul-de-sac. Curtains shifted. Porch lights flicked on one by one like an audience taking their seats. A man in slippers stepped out with his phone. I swear I saw Mrs. Harlow across the street clutch her pearls. It was spectacle, judgment, and justice, all rolled into one perfectly timed crunch. Now, before you decide who was right or wrong, let me take you back, because this wasn't some impulsive act of rage. It was a consequence, a long, patient chain reaction that started the night she parked that Bentley across my barn doors. Remember that? Yeah, the temporary situation, she called it. Well, temporary turned into 3 days, and 3 days turned into her latest power play. 3 nights earlier, I'd found another notice of violation taped to my front porch, hand-delivered, bold red font, signed with that same sharp handwriting. Unauthorized agricultural equipment stored within visible property lines. The irony wasn't lost on me. The equipment in question was my own tractor, sitting on my own land, the same tractor that helped half this neighborhood dig out of the snow last winter. I'd laughed when I saw it, but laughter has a way of dying out when you realize how serious someone like her can be. You ever deal with a person who hides behind policies like they're scripture? Karen was that, the HOA president, self-appointed enforcer, and self-certified moral compass of our subdivision. And she loved nothing more than seeing a man like me, independent, unbothered, rural-minded, toe her imaginary line. That Thursday evening, I tried to reason with her one last time. "Karen," I said, standing by the driveway as she adjusted her sunglasses, though the sun had already set, "you're blocking access to my barn. You can't do that." She smiled that tight politician smile. "Actually, I can. Section 7B of the HOA agreement states that driveways and access points connected to community easements fall under shared jurisdiction. I'm simply ensuring compliance." "Compliance," I repeated. "So your Bentley parked across my entrance, that's compliance?" Her lips curved. "It's temporary." She turned on her heel before I could respond. The sound of her heels against the gravel still grates at me, like tiny hammers driving in the last nails of patience. "Now, let's talk about that tractor, a '98 John Deere 5310. Old, loud, reliable as sin. I'd had it serviced that morning, changed the filters, checked the hydraulics. See, I wasn't planning an accident. I was preparing for inevitability. That night, after a long talk with Officer McCall, the local code enforcement officer, who had had more than one run-in with her, I knew what I had to do. "Legally," he said, "if she's obstructing your access to an agricultural structure, you're within your rights to remove the obstruction. Just be smart about how you do it." Smart. That word echoed in my head as I stood in the barn doorway, staring at her silver Bentley glinting under the motion light. The chrome reflected my face, distorted, warped, like it was asking if I was really that kind of man. Maybe I was.
Maybe she made me that way. The next day passed in silence. No movement from her house, no apology, no attempt to move the car, just that silver Bentley sitting there like a monument to arrogance. By sunset, even the neighbors started whispering. "You're gonna let her do that?" one of them asked as I stood by the fence. "You're a better man than me." I didn't answer. I was saving my words for later. That night, Friday, fog rolled in thick over the cul-de-sac. The air was damp, electric. Around midnight, I slid on my jacket, grabbed the tractor keys from the hook, and stepped outside. You could smell the diesel before you heard that low, guttural rumble that makes the ground hum. The headlights cut through the mist, beams landing square on her car. I climbed into the seat, steady hands, calm heart. The engine idled, patient like it knew what was coming. Just move it a few feet, just far enough to make a point. But the second the metal of the loader touched her front bumper, something shifted inside me. Not rage, something colder, a kind of clarity. I pressed forward slowly, the tires gripping gravel, the weight of the machine pressing against the car. The metal groaned, then popped, a clean, undeniable sound. The crunch heard round the neighborhood. Karen's porch light snapped on. Then her door flew open. She came running, barefoot, in a satin robe and curler, screaming like she was watching a child drown. "Stop! Stop that right now!" I turned off the engine and climbed down. "You're blocking access to my barn," I said evenly. "You're insane," she spat. "That's destruction of property. I'll have you arrested." "Then call the cops. They'll tell you the same thing Officer McCall did." And I'll never forget the look on her face when I said that. The way her eyes darted, not with anger, but with realization. She'd been outmaneuvered, not overpowered. By now, half the neighborhood was outside, phones raised, murmurs everywhere. Someone whispered, "He finally did it." Another laughed under their breath. The power had shifted, and everyone knew it. Karen stomped closer, pointing a trembling finger at me. "You're finished here. The HOA will fine you into the ground." I leaned against the tractor tire. "Funny, I already filed for exemption under agricultural use zoning. Your HOA has got no jurisdiction past that fence." For a moment, she just stood there, processing. You could almost hear the machinery in her head grinding slower than my tractor gears. And that's when she said something that chilled me more than the fog. "You think this ends here?" She turned, stormed back inside, and slammed the door. The officers arrived 20 minutes later. They took photos, notes, statements, and left without cuffs or citations. "Civil matter," they said. "Take it up with the HOA board." Karen watched from her window, face pale, phone pressed to her ear, probably calling the regional office, or worse, a lawyer. By dawn, the neighborhood was buzzing. The video hit the local community page before breakfast. "Farmer takes down HOA president's Bentley." Catchy title, I'll admit. The comments were split right down the middle. Half the people called me a hero, the other half said I should have just towed it. But here's the thing they didn't know. Towing wasn't an option. She'd blocked access not just to the barn, but to the entire property line. Every tow company in the county had already been advised by the HOA not to service disputes within the subdivision. I was boxed in. That's why when people ask me if I regret it, I say no, because it wasn't about the Bentley. It was about boundaries, the invisible lines we draw to keep peace until someone crosses them too many times. You ever notice how silence feels different after something loud? That night, when the noise finally stopped, no shouting, no engines, no applause, it was the quietest it had ever been. But it wasn't peace. It was the kind of quiet that comes before something worse. Because by Monday morning, an envelope arrived in my mailbox. Not from the HOA. This one had a law firm's letterhead. And just like that, I knew. The real fight was about to begin. The crunch echoed through the neighborhood like thunder rolling off a cliff. For a moment, time stopped. Then came the scream, high, raw, and furious. Karen stood there, her robe flapping in the night wind, mouth open, eyes wide, watching her silver Bentley cave in like a tin can beneath the tractor's front loader. I didn't say a word. Didn't need to. The sound did all the talking. You could almost feel the shock ripple down the cul-de-sac. Curtains shifted. Porch lights flicked on one by one like an audience taking their seats. A man in slippers stepped out with his phone. I swear I saw Mrs. Harlow across the street clutch her pearls. It was spectacle, judgment, and justice, all rolled into one perfectly timed crunch. Now, before you decide who was right or wrong, let me take you back, because this wasn't some impulsive act of rage. It was a consequence, a long, patient chain reaction that started the night she parked that Bentley across my barn doors. Remember that? Yeah, the temporary situation, she called it. Well, temporary turned into 3 days, and 3 days turned into her latest power play. 3 nights earlier, I'd found another notice of violation taped to my front porch, hand-delivered, bold red font, signed with that same sharp handwriting. Unauthorized agricultural equipment stored within visible property lines. The irony wasn't lost on me. The equipment in question was my own tractor, sitting on my own land, the same tractor that helped half this neighborhood dig out of the snow last winter. I'd laughed when I saw it, but laughter has a way of dying out when you realize how serious someone like her can be. You ever deal with a person who hides behind policies like they're scripture? Karen was that, the HOA president, self-appointed enforcer, and self-certified moral compass of our subdivision. And she loved nothing more than seeing a man like me, independent, unbothered, rural-minded, toe her imaginary line. That Thursday evening, I tried to reason with her one last time. "Karen," I said, standing by the driveway as she adjusted her sunglasses, though the sun had already set, "you're blocking access to my barn. You can't do that." She smiled that tight politician smile. "Actually, I can. Section 7B of the HOA agreement states that driveways and access points connected to community easements fall under shared jurisdiction. I'm simply ensuring compliance." "Compliance," I repeated. "So your Bentley parked across my entrance, that's compliance?" Her lips curved. "It's temporary." She turned on her heel before I could respond. The sound of her heels against the gravel still grates at me, like tiny hammers driving in the last nails of patience. "Now, let's talk about that tractor, a '98 John Deere 5310. Old, loud, reliable as sin. I'd had it serviced that morning, changed the filters, checked the hydraulics. See, I wasn't planning an accident. I was preparing for inevitability. That night, after a long talk with Officer McCall, the local code enforcement officer, who had had more than one run-in with her, I knew what I had to do. "Legally," he said, "if she's obstructing your access to an agricultural structure, you're within your rights to remove the obstruction. Just be smart about how you do it." Smart. That word echoed in my head as I stood in the barn doorway, staring at her silver Bentley glinting under the motion light. The chrome reflected my face, distorted, warped, like it was asking if I was really that kind of man. Maybe I was. Maybe she made me that way. The next day passed in silence. No movement from her house, no apology, no attempt to move the car. Just that silver Bentley sitting there like a monument to arrogance. By sunset, even the neighbors started whispering. "You're gonna let her do that?" one of them asked as I stood by the fence. "You're a better man than me." I didn't answer. I was saving my words for later. That night, Friday, fog rolled in thick over the cul-de-sac. The air was damp, electric. Around midnight, I slid on my jacket, grabbed the tractor keys from the hook, and stepped outside. You could smell the diesel before you heard that low, guttural rumble that makes the ground hum. The headlights cut through the mist, beams landing square on her car. I climbed into the seat, steady hands, calm heart. The engine idled, patient, like it knew what was coming. Just move it a few feet. just far enough to make a point. But the second the metal of the loader touched her front bumper, something shifted inside me. Not rage, something colder, a kind of clarity. I pressed forward slowly, the tires gripping gravel, the weight of the machine pressing against the car. The metal groaned, then popped, a clean, undeniable sound. The crunch heard round the neighborhood. Karen's porch light snapped on. Then her door flew open. She came running, barefoot, in a satin robe and curler, screaming like she was watching a child drown. "Stop! Stop that right now!" I turned off the engine and climbed down. "You're blocking access to my barn," I said evenly. "You're insane," she spat. "That's destruction of property. I'll have you arrested." "Then call the cops. They'll tell you the same thing Officer McCall did." And I'll never forget the look on her face when I said that. The way her eyes darted, not with anger, but with realization. She'd been outmaneuvered, not overpowered. By now, half the neighborhood was outside, phones raised, murmurs everywhere. Someone whispered, "He finally did it." Another laughed under their breath. The power had shifted, and everyone knew it. Karen stomped closer, pointing a trembling finger at me. "You're finished here. The HOA will fine you into the ground." I leaned against the tractor tire. "Funny, I already filed for exemption under agricultural use zoning. Your HOA has got no jurisdiction past that fence." For a moment, she just stood there, processing. You could almost hear the machinery in her head grinding slower than my tractor gears. And that's when she said something that chilled me more than the fog. "You think this ends here?" She turned, stormed back inside, and slammed the door. The officers arrived 20 minutes later. They took photos, notes, statements, and left without cuffs or citations. "Civil matter," they said. "Take it up with the HOA board." Karen watched from her window, face pale, phone pressed to her ear, probably calling the regional office, or worse, a lawyer. By dawn, the neighborhood was buzzing. The video hit the local community page before breakfast. "Farmer takes down HOA president's Bentley." Catchy title, I'll admit. The comments were split right down the middle. Half the people called me a hero, the other half said I should have just towed it. But here's the thing they didn't know. Towing wasn't an option. She'd blocked access not just to the barn, but to the entire property line. Every tow company in the county had already been advised by the HOA not to service disputes within the subdivision. I was boxed in. That's why when people ask me if I regret it, I say no, because it wasn't about the Bentley. It was about boundaries, the invisible lines we draw to keep peace until someone crosses them too many times. You ever notice how silence feels different after something loud? That night, when the noise finally stopped, no shouting, no engines, no applause, it was the quietest it had ever been. But it wasn't peace. It was the kind of quiet that comes before something worse. Because by Monday morning, an envelope arrived in my mailbox. Not from the HOA. This one had a law firm's letterhead. And just like that, I knew. The real fight was about to begin.
"You're going to jail for this," she screamed, pointing across the gravel like a general commanding invisible troops. Her Bentley sat behind her, hood crumpled like aluminum foil, headlights shattered, the emblem twisted sideways. The flashing red and blue lights washed across her face, not with justice, but disbelief. I stood silent, hands in my pockets, watching her world tilt off its axis. You'd think that'd be the end, right? Tractor crushes Bentley, HOA president humiliated, story over. But that was just the beginning of the fallout. The part where all the truths buried under her perfect community started clawing their way to the surface. You see, in neighborhoods like ours, reputation was currency. And when Karen started to slip, everyone who'd ever suffered under her rule came crawling out of the woodwork. But first, let me take you back to that night, the immediate aftermath. When the cops arrived, they didn't come in hot, they came in tired. You could tell they'd been here before. Officer McCall, same guy who'd warned me days earlier, stepped out of the cruiser with a sigh. "Evening.
he said, adjusting his hat. Heard there was a vehicle obstruction issue. Obstruction? She nearly choked. He destroyed my car. McCall's flashlight swept over the wreck, then up at the barn doors behind it. You parked blocking his access? It was temporary, she snapped. He nodded slowly. Temporary's one thing, but it's still trespassing under County Code 24B. You know that, right? Her face froze, the first crack in her porcelain composure. He turned to me next. You move it with the tractor? I nodded. Gave fair warning, multiple times. He grunted. You got that in writing? I handed him the folder I'd been keeping for weeks, copies of every notice, every HOA fine, and every email exchange where she doubled down. McCall flipped through the pages, nodding as the air between us thickened. Well, he said, finally, looks like you've been documenting everything. Karen's voice wavered. He can't just... He held up a hand. Ma'am, you'll want to be careful what you admit on record. We'll file this as a property dispute for now. That word, dispute, landed like a hammer. It meant no one was getting arrested. It meant her control was slipping. By the next morning, the story had already spread beyond the neighborhood. Someone uploaded the video, the whole thing. Tractor headlights, metal crunch, her shriek echoing down the street. Within hours, it had 500,000 views and a catchy title, HOA President Gets a Taste of Her Own Rules. But what the internet didn't see was what came next, the investigation. The HOA board met that Sunday in the community center. The room smelled like burnt coffee and tension. Karen showed up early, wearing all beige like she was trying to camouflage with the drywall. I walked in 5 minutes late, deliberately. The whispers started immediately. You're really coming to this? She hissed. It's a public meeting, isn't it? I said, pulling out a chair. The vice president, a man named Greg, who'd spent most of the last year avoiding conflict, cleared his throat. All right, let's keep things civil. We're here to review the incident between... She vandalized my property, Karen interrupted, finger trembling as she pointed at me. Actually, Greg cut in, glancing at his notes, according to Officer McCall's report, your car was obstructing access to a private agricultural structure. That's not within HOA authority. The room shifted. You could feel the power draining from her seat like air from a punctured tire. Greg continued. Furthermore, upon review of our internal records, there appear to be multiple instances of procedural overreach during your presidency, including the unauthorized issuance of fines and selective enforcement of bylaws. Selective enforcement? She repeated, voice cracking. Yeah, Greg said, sliding a stack of papers forward. Turns out 3 other residents filed similar complaints, all dismissed by you. The silence that followed wasn't just awkward, it was seismic. Karen tried to recover. Those were valid. They had unapproved modifications. Like solar panels? One woman interrupted from the back. You fined me for eco-friendly lighting while your house had floodlights all winter. Another neighbor chimed in. You told my husband he couldn't park his work truck overnight. Then your son parked his Jeep across the sidewalk for a week. It snowballed from there. Every grudge, every petty fine, every quiet humiliation she dished out under the HOA banner came roaring back to life. She tried to fight it, spinning excuses, quoting bylaws like scripture, but the tide had turned. Greg finally leaned back, folding his hands. Karen, given the growing concerns over conduct and conflict of interest, the board will hold a vote of confidence regarding your presidency. She scoffed. You can't do that. We already did. This morning. You could have heard a pin drop. Her face turned pale, and for the first time, she didn't have a comeback. She gathered her purse, stood up slow, and muttered, You'll regret this, all of you. But no one stopped her when she left. Now here's the part that never made it online. After her resignation, an audit uncovered over $18,000 in misallocated HOA funds, landscaping invoices that led to nowhere, maintenance projects billed twice. Turns out, Karen was using HOA money to beautify her own property. Legal fees, they called it. By the end of the month, the new board sent her a notice demanding restitution. They even voted to dissolve the old Aesthetic Review Committee, the same committee she had created to police porch colors and lawn decorations. The neighborhood started breathing again. People painted fences, planted gardens, and talked to each other like human beings. For the first time, I walked outside and didn't feel like I was under surveillance. No letters taped to doors, no passive-aggressive reminders in the mail. Just quiet. But not everyone was happy. A few of her allies stayed behind, muttering about lawless neighbors and precedent. One of them even left a note in my mailbox. "Enjoy your victory. It won't last." But still, I couldn't help but smile when I saw it. You can't scare someone who's already lost everything they were afraid of losing. A few weeks later, I got a letter, this time from her attorney. Civil damages, property destruction, defamation, the whole stack of threats wrapped in legal jargon. My attorney, yes, I'd finally hired one, flipped through the pages and smirked. "She's bluffing," he said. "She knows she doesn't have a case." He was right. The video footage, the documentation, the police report, all backed me. The car was illegally parked, the HOA had no jurisdiction on my side of the property line, and best of all, the court saw the incident for what it was, a consequence of ongoing harassment. The lawsuit never made it past filing. When the dismissal came through, I drove by her house, curiosity, not gloating. The curtains were drawn, for sale sign crooked in the yard. The Bentley was gone, of course, replaced by a dent in the gravel where its tires once sat. You'd think I'd feel victorious, triumphant, but what I really felt was quiet. Like a storm had passed, and I was standing in the wreckage realizing how much noise it took to silence one person's ego. I rebuilt the barn door myself that spring, reinforced the frame, repainted it red. The tractor set parked inside, washed and oiled, waiting for the next job. Neighbors waved when they passed now. One even dropped off a pie as a thank you, said it was for taking one for the team. I laughed, but deep down I knew it wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about reclaiming something simple, the right to live without fear of your own front yard. Still, every now and then, when I hear an engine hum outside late at night, I glance out the window, half expecting to see her standing there, clipboard in hand, smile sharp as glass. Because people like her, they don't just vanish, they regroup. And somewhere out there, I bet Karen is sitting in a new neighborhood meeting, explaining how she's just trying to maintain standards. But this time, I hope someone's smart enough to keep a tractor on standby.